Okay, week 2 of the 2024 college football season is officially in the books, wrapping up Saturday night. Great games this weekend. I had a good time hanging out with you guys on the game streams, and a great start to the college football season. But today's Monday, and that means it is time to update the top 25 ranking, the Uncle Lou top 25 ranking. So here we go. Now, per usual, I'll start off this way. I don't expect you to agree with this top 25. Nobody ever agrees with any top 25 100% they ever see, so that's not the point. I am going to try to explain to you, though, why I have certain teams ranked where I do. That's a big complaint you hear about the AP, the coaches, the playoffs, whatever, is that there's no explanations. You don't really know why somebody has one team here or there. Again, I'm not going to explain it to you in an attempt to change your mind. You're free to think whatever you think about this top 25 or any other. It's just sort of a peek inside my brain why I choose to rank certain teams where I do. The other thing is, early in the season, I move teams around a lot within my top 25. In the offseason, it's fine to guess, but that's basically what we're doing with a top 25. We're guessing that this team is 7, this team is 12, right? It's still a guess now. It remains a guess. But as the season goes along, you have actual data you can use, right? In the offseason, you're looking at last year's team, what'd they lose, who's coming back, who are the coaches, what's the schedule, how did they improve, how might they be worse, and then you're guessing a top 25. Well, now that the games are being played, it's less guessing. We at least have some actual data points to go on. For example, nobody in their right mind right now would have Michigan ranked ahead of Texas. They just wouldn't. Texas just blew them out, right? There may have been somebody a week ago who, for whatever reason, thought Michigan was better than Texas and could have justified having Michigan ranked ahead of Texas. I didn't, but there could have been some that did. That's out the window now. You don't have to guess. We've seen them play. We've seen all the teams play. We've seen some wins. We've seen some losses. You've got some actual information to go on here. So I think top 25s should be way more fluid early in the season than they are later in the season. You have to be able to move these teams around. You have to be willing to do that. So here we go. Here is this week's top 25. A new number 1 team. I moved Texas from 3 to 1. Now, there's a couple of things going on here. Texas and Georgia both have really good wins. Ohio State does not. That's not the fault of Ohio State. That's just the schedule is what it is. Ohio State has blown out 2 opponents. They were both group of 5. Texas and Georgia have blown out 1 group of 5 opponent, 1 power 5 opponent, both of which were and still are ranked. So again, this doesn't mean that Ohio State is not better than either Texas or Georgia. We're probably going to see Ohio State play either one or both of those teams at some point in the postseason. We'll be able to answer that question for sure. These are all really, really good teams. I'm just going on what we've seen so far. You have to reward teams, I think, for the bigger wins. And right now, Texas and Georgia have the more impressive wins than Ohio State does. I think what Texas did to Michigan on the road, a true road game in Ann Arbor, is a little more impressive than what Georgia did to Clemson on a neutral field in Atlanta. Now, both games were dominating. Georgia dominated Clemson really from start to finish. Texas the same with Michigan. And we're splitting hairs here. But again, especially early in the season, I always reward wins. I had Georgia number 1 last week. Before they played Clemson, I had Georgia at 2. I had Ohio State at 1. Georgia beats Clemson. Ohio State and Michigan beat nobodies. I moved Georgia to 1. This week, Georgia beats a nobody. Texas beats Michigan. I moved Texas to 1. So you see what I'm saying here. It's not an indictment on Georgia or Ohio State. Georgia blew out a nobody. Ohio State blew out a nobody. Texas blew out a top 10 team in Michigan. Not top 10 anymore, but you get what I'm saying. So I've got Texas at 1, Georgia at 2, Ohio State at 3. You're really splitting hairs here. Georgia beat Tennessee Tech 48-3. They've yet to give up a touchdown this year. Clemson 1 field goal. Tennessee Tech 1 field goal. Texas blew out Michigan 31-12. The game was never even competitive from start to finish. Ohio State took care of business against Western Michigan 56-0. This week, Georgia plays on the road at Kentucky. Looked like it might be an interesting game in the offseason, but after Kentucky got blown out this past weekend at home by South Carolina, it looks like this could be another blowout for the Dogs. They're currently about a 24-point favorite on the road in Lexington. Texas, back to the group of 5 this week. They play UTSA, and Ohio State is on a bye this week. So no real chance for Ohio State to impress anybody this week, really. I guess it's possible if Georgia were to beat Kentucky by 30 or 40 points and Texas beats UTSA by 2 or 3 scores, that next week I might flip-flop Georgia and Texas again, since Georgia is at least playing a Power 5 opponent, whereas Texas is playing UTSA. But again, that wouldn't be an indictment on Texas. It would just be a reward for Georgia in beating a Power 5 team. But this week, Texas 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3. Now we've got some more changes here. I've moved Ole Miss up 2 spots from 6 to 4. Now, Ole Miss has not beat a Power 5 team. That is true. They've played 2 elementary schools. That's true. They blew them both out. That's also true. Alabama also has not played a Power 5 opponent, but they only blew out one of their 2 Group of 5 opponents. Last week, they really struggled with South Florida. I know the final score is what it is, okay? 42-16. If you watch the game, then you understand the concerns that people might have about Alabama after what they saw. They did not play well along the lines of scrimmage. Jalen Milroe did not play well. This was a 2-3-point game late into the fourth quarter. Alabama exploded for 4 touchdowns in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game. Once South Florida basically entered desperation mode and started going for it on 4th down, they had a turnovers there at the end of the game, and it got away from them at the end. But this was a close, hard-fought, competitive game for 56 minutes. And Alabama blew them out for 4 minutes at the end. But some concerns coming out of this game, I think, for Alabama. So I have moved Alabama to 5. That's down 1 spot. I had them at 4. I moved them down just 1 spot. Still a top 5 team, still a really good team, still going to win a whole lot of games. But again, moving these teams around early in the season based on what they do on the field. Ole Miss, I moved from 6 to 4, so up 2 spots. Again, it's not necessarily anything Ole Miss did in this case. It's the struggle that Alabama had against South Florida. And, of course, I had Notre Dame at 5. More on them in a minute. They lost. They're way down the list. In fact, they're not even on the list. I dropped them completely out of my top 25. I'll talk about that maybe a little bit at the end. So Ole Miss, 2 blowouts against 2 nobodies. I moved them up 2 spots, 6 to 4, because Notre Dame lost and Alabama struggled to South Florida. Moved Bama down 1 spot from 4 to 5. So my top 5, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Bama. The biggest riser in this week's poll, there's really 2, Tennessee and Miami. Tennessee, I moved all the way up to number 6. What Tennessee did to NC State, to me, was very impressive for a variety of reasons. Well, first, let me say, I don't think NC State's a great team. They were ranked in the preseason. They struggled against Western Carolina in week 1, and a lot of people, myself included, kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt. Now, I did drop NC State in my ranking significantly after that struggle against Western Carolina. I had NC State around 15 or 16 in the preseason. After they struggled against Western Carolina last week, I dropped them to 25, and Tennessee came out and absolutely destroyed them. So this was a dominating game from Tennessee from start to finish. NC State was never able to get anything going offensively, and if you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about. And here's what's the most impressive thing to me about this Tennessee game, and I hope people start picking this up about Tennessee, because it's something I've been saying for really a year and a half on here. Tennessee is not an air raid team. They don't throw the ball 50 times a game. Yes, Hendon Hooker was a really good quarterback and put up really good numbers 2 years ago. Joe Milton, not so much last year. But Tennessee, at their best, is a running team that plays really good defense, and that's what they did in this game against NC State. They completely shut them down. NC State ran for, 30 yards? Grayson McCall couldn't get anything going through the air. They were harassing him all day long. They shut down the wide receivers. The front 7 played great. And offensively, Nico didn't have a great game. It's not like Nico had 300 or 400 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns and another 50 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. No. Probably his worst game of his, it is his worst game of his career. He played better against Iowa in the bowl game, and he played better last week against an elementary team than he played this week against NC State. He did not have a great game. Had a couple of turnovers, and Tennessee still blew out NC State 51-10. This was a dominating performance from Tennessee by everybody other than Nico. And that Tennessee fans should be extremely happy and excited about that. 2 years ago, Tennessee they were good. They were sort of trending towards where they are now. They had a good defense. Don't know that it was great. In fact, I know it wasn't great. They had a good running game. But 2 years ago, they had to have Hendon Hooker have an amazing game in order to win big games. Think about the Alabama game they won, right? Hendon Hooker went nuts in that game. They win 52-49 or whatever it ended up being, right? Tennessee's at a point now where their entire roster is good enough that they can win games convincingly. In this case, 51-10, when their quarterback does not have a great game. Tennessee punished NC State all day long on the ground. Nico completed passes when he needed to. Was it a perfect game? No. Again, a couple of turnovers, made some bad reads, some bad decisions, held on to the ball a little too long a couple of times. Yeah, all the kinds of things you expect to see from a first-year starting quarterback. But Tennessee blew them out without a great game from Nico. Tennessee is a legitimate playoff contender. They're a legitimate threat to win the SEC. I had them at 10-2 in the preseason, barely missing out on the SEC championship game, but still making the playoffs at 10-2. That included a loss at home to Bama and a loss on the road at Georgia. I still think they're likely to lose on the road to Georgia, but that Bama game is starting to look more and more winnable for Tennessee at home coming up here in a few weeks. They also play on the road at Oklahoma in a couple of weeks, and that's, we'll see. I think that's a tougher test than NC State, but we're going to talk about Oklahoma in a minute. They have some issues. If this game was being played tomorrow, I don't think anybody would pick Oklahoma to win it. Now, it's not being played tomorrow, but the point is, I had Tennessee at 13. I thought that was a fair spot for them last week, considering their opponent and who they had played. NC State was a significant step up in competition, and they absolutely destroyed them from start to finish. I've got Tennessee in this week's ranking at number 6. Utah, I left it 7. Utah's the least talented team in the top 15, probably, in terms of just roster talent, top to bottom, how they recruit, how they portal, the overall ratings of players, how many players they'll put into the NFL, whatever sort of metric you want to use. They're also one of the best coach teams, most disciplined teams, one of the best developmental teams. They seem to get the absolute most out of every single player they have. They didn't have a great game this week, but they did beat a Power 5 opponent, which is more than a lot of teams in the top 10 can say for this week. They played Baylor, and they took care of business. They won 23-12, I believe was the final score. Now, I'm higher on Utah than most other rankings you'll see. I think in the AP and the coaches, I think have them somewhere between 10 and 15. I really like Utah. They're a veteran team. They remind me a lot of last year's Michigan team. They're not quite as talented, right? Because they don't recruit at that level. They won't put that number of players in the NFL, for example. But they're that style of team. They're disciplined, great along the lines of scrimmage. They got a quarterback that can get the job done, right? Utah's a team to keep an eye on in the Big 12. You got to remember, somebody from the Big 12 is making the playoffs, and Utah to me is the clear favorite right now. Miami's another team I moved way up. They beat a nobody this week. I get it, but to be honest with you, I was a little concerned about how Miami would play this week. I didn't talk a lot about it because it was an absolute nothing game, but just think about some of the good, not great, because there haven't been any great. Think about some of the good Miami teams over the last 15 years. How many times have we seen them get a big win, get hyped up, and then something weird happens? Now, not that they would have lost this game that they played this past week. They played Florida A&M, but in the past, it seems like you would have seen this game scroll across the bottom of your TV screen maybe, and it would have said something like, Miami 13, Florida A&M 7, third quarter or something. That wasn't the case here. 56-9, Miami absolutely destroyed them. I've talked a little bit about this. Miami is going to fly under the radar for 2-3 weeks now. They play a bunch of nobodies and a bye week and all that. And I think that's great for Miami because they tend to wilt in the spotlight. At least that's been the case the last 15 or 20 years when it's looked like they're about to make a move towards the ACC championship or a potential play or whatever. And they just wilt away. I think it actually suits Miami well that they're going to fly under the radar for about a month. It'll be another 2 or 3 weeks before anybody really talks about them. But I had them at 11 last week, and I moved them up to 8. Now, it's not because they beat Florida A&M. It's not even because really that they blew out Florida A&M. It's more because several teams or 2 teams ahead of them lost. Notre Dame and Michigan I had ahead of Miami last week. They both lost. Oregon continues to underperform, so I had to drop them again. And Penn State didn't look great either. I thought about dropping Penn State. We'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, so I moved Miami all the way up to 8. And it's more a result of what the other teams didn't do this week. Penn State struggled with Bowling Green. Missouri still doesn't have any Power 5 wins, so I've got them at 10. Oregon continues to drive the struggle bus to disappointing wins against teams they should be blowing out. So, Miami did what they were supposed to do, yeah, but it's more a result of what other teams didn't do. But I've got them all the way up at 8. Penn State at 9. They really moved up by default. Penn State was very disappointing this week. It wasn't a surprise to me that they started out slow against Bowling Green. I predicted that last week when I talked about that game on my upsets video. But they play a road game in week 1, semi-rivalry game against West Virginia. They win. They got to come back home and play a nothing team, Bowling Green, at noon. No one's watching. No one talked about the game. No one cares. I wasn't surprised at all when I saw it come across the bottom of my screen first quarter, early second quarter, that Bowling Green had a small lead. Didn't surprise me at all. I was shocked that that lead remained in the third and the fourth quarter, and Penn State was never able to pull away. Now, they did win in the end, barely, though. They beat Bowling Green 34-27. Not an impressive performance by Penn State. Penn State's got to get to the point where they're playing up to their potential week in and week out. You can't rely on getting your team up for the big games and then letting them float in the nothing games. You've got to take that next step and have them prepared every single week. Penn State should have blown Bowling Green out, and they didn't. I tried to find a way to drop Penn State some, but again, the problem is 2 teams ahead of them lost, Notre Dame and Michigan. Other teams around them played bad as well, Oregon, for example. And Penn State at least has that Power 5 win over West Virginia to prop their schedule up. That's something that Missouri and Oregon don't have. Now, Missouri hasn't struggled at all. They've blown out 2 bad teams, but they don't have a Power 5 win yet. Now, that will change this week. Missouri plays Boston College, who, for reasons unknown, is currently ranked by the AP. I know they beat Florida State. I don't think Boston College is one of the top 25 teams in the country, and you see I've got them at 22. But, like, you get down to 20 to 25, and you start going, okay, well, Boston College is 2-0. That's great. Are they really better than Iowa? I mean, I dropped Iowa out. It gets really hard this early in the season when there's a lot of one-loss teams that are better than some 2-0 teams. I mean, so you find yourself, what do you do there? Like, Iowa can't score. They still have a really good defense. They barely lost a rivalry game to Iowa State. Do you leave them ranked? I didn't. I dropped them, and I put Boston College in Illinois. Anyway, we'll get to that when we get to the end. But I've got Missouri at 10. They play Boston College this coming week. Oregon, I dropped from 9 to 11. So Oregon has won their first 2 games, and they continue to fall in my ranking. I had them third in the preseason. After week 1, I dropped them to 9, and now I've dropped them all the way to 11. And I tried to find reasons to drop them further. I could probably make a case that Louisville should be ahead of Oregon, Kansas State, Southern Cal. Maybe even Michigan, although that's a harder case to make. But I could have Oregon as low as 14 and justify it if I wanted to put Oregon at 14. Southern Cal's got a win over LSU. They've looked dominant, not dominant. Well, they didn't dominate LSU, but they were dominant this past week. Louisville's blown out 2 nobodies. Kansas State had a decent win against Tulane this week. I could have moved Oregon all the way down to 14. And maybe I should have, and I'm still holding on to some kind of a hope that they're going to start playing like the team I think they can be. I don't know, but it doesn't look good for Oregon right now. Struggled against Boise State, and say whatever you want. Boise State, they're one of the best group of 5 teams. They should not be competing with Oregon. You look at the roster, it's loaded with NFL talent everywhere. Something is wrong at Oregon. I don't know what it is. I'm not smart enough to tell you. Something's off. Something's not clicking. Something's not working. Something's not connecting. I don't know what it is. Something is off. They can't run the ball. Dylan Gabriel looks up and down. They got to get it figured out quick, fast, and in a hurry because Big Ten's coming knocking soon. And the Oregon team I've seen play so far is going to have 3 or 4 Big Ten losses if they don't get it figured out. So I moved Oregon all the way down. To number 11. Now, they play Oregon State this week, so sort of the Civil War rivalry game. We'll see what they do there. It's on the road in Corvallis. Oregon at 11. Kansas State at 12. Another team I wasn't sure really what to do with. Where do you put these teams that are going to be in the top 2 or 3 of the Big 12, but might not be better than the 6th or 7th SEC team? I don't know. You can't prove those things, so I'm going to continue to rank these Power 4 teams accordingly. I think Kansas State's got a chance to play for, potentially even win the Big 12. I've got them ranked 12th this week. They were 12th last week. They beat Tulane, I think 37-24. I think it was 37-20. Yeah, 34-27. They play Arizona this week. Arizona's ranked. A great quarterback, wide receiver duo there. This could be a really good game. And of course, it's a conference game. It still sounds weird to say, but yes, Kansas State versus Arizona this week is a conference game. I've got Arizona at 20. They weren't that impressive this week either. Arizona, they struggled with Northern Arizona. Was it 23-12 or something like that? Ended up being the final score. Yeah, 22-10. Sorry, 22-10. But they play on the road at Kansas State this week. So whoever wins that game is in a good spot in the Big 12 early in the year because they'll have a pretty good win over a pretty good team in conference, right? Which will put them a couple of games ahead. One of the better games of the weekend, I think, Arizona on the road at Kansas State. Louisville, I've got at 13. They might be a top 10 team. I don't know what to do with Louisville. Apparently nobody else does either. The AP's got them at 19 for reasons unknown. They made the ACC championship game last year, so they were the second best team in the ACC. No one talks about them. No one picks them to make the ACC title game or win it or the playoffs or whatever, and they just keep going and blowing people out, 49-14. Jacksonville State's terrible, but that's what you got to do to terrible teams. So I think I might have Louisville too low at 13, but I'm higher than the AP and the coaches. I mean, the AP's got them all the way down at 19. I mean, they just keep winning. I don't know. Southern Cal at 14. I was impressed with their defense this week. I didn't know what to make of them in week one after LSU. Maybe LSU was falling off drastically offensively, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Lincoln Riley shut somebody out this week. Now, it was Utah State, but they beat them 48-0. But how many shutouts does Lincoln Riley have in his head coaching career? I don't know. I didn't look it up, but it can't be very many. I don't know if, I'm not here to tell you Southern Cal is magically going to have a top 10 defense this year, but so far, early results for Southern Cal and Lincoln Riley, drastically improved on the defensive side of the ball. I've got them at 14. Michigan, I dropped down to 15. Here's the thing. They got blown out, embarrassing loss, drug up and down the field like a dead body for 4 hours. All that's true. But how good do you think Texas is? I think they're really, really good. So what are you supposed to do with a team that loses to them? I mean, I get it. It wasn't close. If it would have been a close loss, Michigan would still be in the top 10, right? So I'm punishing them for getting blown out. But I've seen people say they shouldn't even be ranked. And maybe they won't be eventually. But if you think, if you lose by 3 or 4 scores to a top 3 team, top 5 team, and that's your only loss so far in the year, I mean, how far really should you drop? So I've got them at 15. They obviously have tough games coming up. So they're either gonna fall or rise, depending on what happens with some of these tougher games that they have coming up. Now, it won't be this week. They play Arkansas State, but they've got games with Southern Cal coming up. Of course, the Ohio State game at the end of the year. So they've got a chance to prove that either they belong in the top 10 amongst the possible playoff teams, even with a blowout loss to Texas, or that it's just too much change and turnover in one season, and they're going to finish the season with 3 or 4 losses. We'll figure that out over the course of the months to come, but I've got them at 15. LSU, I've got it 16. Reasoning here is pretty simple. I'm not that high on LSU, but I'm trying to use as little amount of my opinion as possible. Now, it's impossible to completely separate opinion from a top 25 ranking, but if I'm going to have Southern Cal at 14, and that was a hell of a game they played against LSU, how much further down the list from Southern Cal should I have LSU? Last week, I had Southern Cal at 18. So I moved them up 4 spots to 14, and I had LSU at 22. So LSU went from being 4 spots behind Southern Cal to now only being 2 spots behind Southern Cal. LSU moved from 22 to 16 in my ranking, Southern Cal from 18 to 14. I've still got questions about LSU like everybody else does, and we'll see how they do in conference play once we start it up here in the SEC. And I think they're going to lose another 2 or 3 games at least. But right now, again, trying to take my opinion out of it, I've got them at 16. I've got Clemson at 17. Very impressive offensive performance this past weekend by Clemson against App State. But look, App State, Boise State, 2 of the better group of 5 programs, generally speaking, over the last 15 years. Not that either one of them is the best group of 5 team year in and year out every single year. We've seen Central Florida, Cincinnati, Memphis, UTSA. We've seen a lot of group of 5 teams have good years, but App State and Boise State are 2 of the more well-respected group of 5 programs. They tend to be good year in and year out, and then every once in a while, they're really good, right? Oregon struggled all game long to take care of Boise State at home. Clemson absolutely destroyed App State and left no doubt from the first quarter on. Probably the biggest offensive explosion we've seen from Clemson, well, definitely in a long, long time. So what do? You got Michigan, LSU, and Clemson, all with 1 loss. Is there anybody that thinks any of those teams aren't one of the best 25 teams in the country? I'm certain. Well, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure Clemson and Michigan are one of the best 25 teams in the country. I'm less sure about LSU, but I'm still pretty sure they are. So they've all got the one loss. All three of those schools have lost. I know there's no such thing as a good loss, but it's a term that's used, right? Michigan, LSU, and Clemson, all three have good losses. And what I mean by that is they all lost to good teams. Now, Michigan and Clemson got blown out, whereas LSU did not. So I almost put LSU ahead of Michigan at 15 and Michigan at 16 just because of that factor. But for me, it just came down to Michigan, I think, lost to the better team, Texas, than LSU did Southern Cal. And honestly, I think Michigan would beat LSU if they played tomorrow. So that's my reasoning. That's my thought process. Michigan, LSU, Clemson, all very similar, I think. Oklahoma State remains undefeated. I have them at 18. Again, I live streamed the noon games on Saturday. Oklahoma State and Arkansas were playing. I've never been so mad, angry, frustrated, irritated watching a college football game as I was during that game. It's two not very good teams, poorly coached, bad decisions from start to finish by both coaching staffs, turnovers, penalties, missed field goals in key moments by both teams. It just a frustrating game to watch. Oklahoma State's got Ollie Gordon and not much else. Their quarterback, I didn't think played well. They just don't look good. Their defense is a disaster. They gave 600 and something yards to Arkansas. But they're 2-0, and they're like the third or fourth in the Big 12 in terms of odds to win it. So I don't know what you do with a team like that. Do I think Oklahoma State would beat Nebraska tomorrow? No. Would they beat Oklahoma? Maybe. That'd be, I don't know. Oklahoma's got issues too. But Oklahoma State hangs on, beats Arkansas in overtime. I've got them at 18. That's down 3 spots. I had them at 15 last week. Remember, this guy just hates Oklahoma State. I heard that last week. I picked Oklahoma State to win the Big 12 in the preseason. I don't. What are we doing? People, me ranking a team differently than where you think they should be ranked does not equal me hate that team. You're just brain dead is what that is. Did I hate Oklahoma State when I picked them to win the Big 12, or did I just develop a hate for them in the last 7 days? I mean, you people are retarded. Speaking of retarded, I've got Oklahoma at 19. Boy, they about tipped that fucking wagon open this past weekend against a terrible Houston team. I know Houston's Power 5, but give me a break. Didn't they get beat 34-7 the week before by UNLV? Come on, man. Come on. Oklahoma struggled all day long. 14-12 forever in the second half of this game before Oklahoma finally broke out and got a safety. Ends up winning 16-12. The same problems, questions, and concerns that myself and everybody with a brain had about Oklahoma in the offseason showed themselves in this game. Bad offensive line, quarterback play that's not up to par. The defense might have been the lone bright spot here for you, but again, it's Houston. Oklahoma's got issues. They won 16-12. They play Tulane this week. We'll see. Arizona at 20. They remain undefeated. Talked about that already. They beat Northern Arizona. Wasn't impressive, but they did win. Nebraska into the poll for the first time at 21. Mike can make a case to have them higher. Recency bias, in this case, is working against Nebraska. Nebraska's been terrible for the better part of the last decade. But they did handle Colorado 28-10. A little concerning that they couldn't score in the second half. They were up 28-0, I think it was, at halftime. 28-3 or whatever it was. Anyway, they couldn't score in the second half. Now, defensively, they harassed Colorado and Shedeur Sanders all game long, but almost everybody is going to do that because Colorado's got the worst offensive line in all of football. But nevertheless, this is Nebraska we're talking about. It was a big win for them, big home win for Matt Rule. Dylan Raiola, I thought, played okay. He didn't play great. Again, true freshman. He's going to make some mistakes. But Nebraska gets the win. I've got him into the ranking at number 21. This week. At number 22, Boston College. And I told you, I don't understand why the AP's got them ranked. I don't know why I've got them ranked. Rankings are always hard to do, but this early in the season, once you get down to like teams 20 through 25, to be honest with you, there's about 20 teams that I think you could put in the 20 to 25 spot and justify it. You've got the ones that I've got here: Arizona, Nebraska, Boston College, Iowa State, Syracuse, who beat Georgia Tech and remains undefeated. Illinois beat a ranked Kansas team. In the case of Syracuse and Illinois, they're undefeated, and they beat a team that last week everybody had ranked, Kansas and Georgia Tech. So, I reward them for that with the 24th and the 25th spot. Iowa State also beat a ranked team, Iowa. Okay, reward them. Boston College didn't do anything of note, but let's put them in anyway. And then Nebraska beats a terrible Colorado team, so they go in. So that's the explanation there. But honestly, you could have Boise State in there. They lost, but it was to the number 11 team by 1 touchdown. I could have put Boise State somewhere 20-25 and justified that, probably. Memphis could probably have Memphis in there. Washington is undefeated. Vandy's undefeated. You want to put them 20? Now, I don't have them in there, but I'm just saying there. In other words, I'm not confident at all. The 20 through 25 it's a revolving door because these are not elite teams. These are teams that really could lose on any given week, right? So there's a lot of rotating in and out in sort of the 20 through 25 spot. And early in the year, when you don't have a lot of games to go on, that's even more the case there. But that's what I have for this week as my top 25. I'm looking forward to week 3 of the college football season. The poll is up on Patreon. So for those of you who are members over on the Patreon page, make sure you head over there and cast your vote. I'll be live streaming again this Saturday on Patreon at whatever time slot y'all vote for over on the Patreon page. So make sure you get your votes in. I usually shut that poll down Tuesday night or Wednesday morning so that I can announce the results and announce my streaming schedule for the weekend. So make sure you head over there. The link is in the description of the video that will take you over to the Patreon page. All right, everybody, I appreciate you watching. I hope your week gets off to a good start. Enjoy your Monday. Have a good morning.